Playing either in solo queue or multiplayer in Elden Ring Nightreign has had its debates amongst players for some time now, with one thing that players also tend to add to that discussion: it's Nightlords, more specifically their Everdark Sovereign versions. And now that all of the Everdark Sovereign versions of each Nightlord, including the DLC, have been released for Elden Ring Nightreign at this point in time, sorry Heelster and Dreadlord, I think it's appropriate to rank all of these in order from easiest to hardest. Now, before I begin ranking all of these Everdarks, do keep in mind that this ranking won't take into consideration the quality of the fight. This is solely going to be based on how easy or hard the fight is. And for anyone wondering if this ranking is going to be based on solo queue or multiplayer, well, it's actually going to be based on both of these perspectives combined, as I've defeated all of the Everdark versions in both ways once again after taking a good break from the game before the DLC released. For this ranking, I chose to go with both Revenant and Wilder. And before you ask, yes, I did defeat all of the Everdark bosses with both of these Nightfarers in solo queue and multiplayer. This was solely to see if there was a difference in both the fights and difficulty when switching characters, in which I'll state right now, for me, there really wasn't much of a difference when playing on either side with both of these Nightfarers, but I'll go into more details once I start ranking all of these. So, let's get started. Starting with the bottom two spots, these fights are placed here as they are just a matter of knowing how to properly dodge their attacks to counterattack, since these Everdarks leave themselves completely wide open afterwards. Which, by the way, if you're struggling with these Everdarks and normally face tank their attacks, then trust me, the rest won't be any easier for you in the long run. Number 8 goes to Maris, aka Everdark Augur. For this one, although it's a gimmick and endurance fight, it's all a matter of 3 things, which are: do you know the boss's moveset to properly dodge? Are you able to properly manage resources? And do you actually know how to use Storm Ruler against it? With using Storm Ruler being one aspect that I noticed a lot when I was doing the fight in multiplayer. What I mean by this is that some players either didn't know how to use it, which includes even equipping the weapon to begin with, and how they have to charge up the attack to both recover your FP and properly damage Maris. In the case of learning the boss's moveset, which by the way is something that you should learn for all Everdark fights, I noticed that some players that I ended up getting paired up with didn't really know how to dodge his attacks and depended on pure luck. And to give my own advice, at the very least, do the fight and the other Everdarks as well in solo queue so that you are able to rely on your own skill to properly dodge as opposed to only depending on luck. Though regardless if you do this fight in either solo queue or multiplayer, I still consider this fight to be the easiest of them all.
That was easy.
Number 7 goes to Fulgor, aka Everdark Darkdrift Knight. For this fight, in terms of presentation, I think it's one of the best to see in action. But in terms of difficulty, I found it to be pretty easy in both solo queue and in multiplayer. This is mostly due to the majority of his attacks always being telegraphed and leaving him completely wide open afterwards with a well-timed dodge. The only exception for his moveset will probably have to be for his arrows that can be shot extremely fast and are able to drain your HP extremely quick. Though I personally like this fight a lot due to how fast-paced it can be in both solo queue and multiplayer, the only thing that I can say changes between solo queue and multiplayer is that he tends to switch targets relatively quick in multiplayer, making you have to chasing him around a lot more as opposed to him just closing the distance on you in solo queue.
Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out! Hey yo, what the fuck?
For the next 2 spots, these not only include knowing how to dodge appropriately to counterattack, but it also adds knowing when to retreat so that you don't take unnecessary damage and waste your resources, which for some reason, I found that to be lacking among the players I ended up getting paired up with in multiplayer. With number 6 going to Calico, aka Everdark Fissure in the Fog. Now this fight can either be an endurance fight or one that can end extremely quick due to your damage output, which also includes losing the fight if you're extremely reckless when fighting against her. In my case, when doing this fight in both solo queue and multiplayer, with the exception of some fights, it was mostly an endurance fight, since Caligo has a tendency of flying away from where either my teammates or myself are currently at, making me have to close the distance immediately before the frostbite status keeps draining my HP. For solo queue, since all of her attacks are directed at you, you definitely have to pay attention to what move she's currently doing and time your dodge to avoid taking unnecessary damage, as some attacks do have an aftershock effect that activates after the initial swing, in which I'll say that with the players I queued up with in multiplayer, the majority either didn't know the dodge timing or kept face tanking all of her attacks, which would either make them use up more resources than necessary or knock them down. Though I will say that you can use the mountaintop buff to negate the frostbite effect, but after doing this fight with both and without the secret, I can say that this fight is doable either way and is actually not too tough, provided you know when you're supposed to retreat to avoid losing the fight.
Just do it!
Coming in at number 5 are the Harmonious, aka the Salvation Standard Bearers Balancers. This is where I can admit that the DLC fight can actually change drastically in both solo queue and multiplayer if either yourself or other players don't know how to control the pace of the fight. What I mean by this is that if you or your teammates decide to attack the other Valkyries that aren't directly charging at you, then guess what? Congratulations! You just unwillingly added another Valkyrie to gang up on yourself and the rest of your team, making the fight way harder than it actually is. No, really, this fight can be pretty simple in both solo queue and multiplayer. In solo queue, all you gotta do is focus on the one Valkyrie that's charging at you, which by the way is parryable, and after taking it down, a different Valkyrie will charge at you instead, which will allow you to repeat the same process until it transforms it to its colossal form. And in multiplayer, this same method can be done against it, provided you all stick together and gang up on the Valkyrie that charges either at you or your teammate and then move on to the next one. But if just one of you decides to wander off to attack another Valkyrie and not knock it down in time, then as already mentioned, you'll just add another Valkyrie to the mix, which by the way does its own move separate from the others. Though if you do manage to knock it down, it makes looping them a much quicker process than in solo queue. Just be careful not to get the bleed status activated due to mistiming a dodge from its spear attacks. Now for its colossal form, it stays the same for both solo queue and multiplayer. If you're far away from it, most of its attacks won't even reach you. The only things that you always have to be on the lookout are its ground weights after diving into the ground and the massive AoE attack that's always used before transforming back into separate Valkyries. Other than that, if you're extremely far away after it transforms back into the Valkyries, you can pick them off after they decide to come at you one at a time. For the next two spots, these not only combine the other two aspects of the previous fights, which are knowing how to properly dodge the counterattack and knowing when to retreat, but it also adds the aspect of you as the player being able to change the pace of the fight to your advantage. And from this point forward, this is where you as a player has to pay attention to the boss's overall movement, which includes their subtle signs that give away what their next attack will be. Coming in at number 4, it's Animus, Noster, and Farnus, aka Everdark Sentient Pest, While you can say that this fight is similar to the Balancers fight, the biggest difference is that all three of them will attack you regardless if you're paying attention to them or not. As in this fight, a lot can happen if you don't make it go at your pace, and believe it or not, this is much more noticeable in solo queue than in multiplayer. Focusing only on Fardas? Well, guess what? Noster is going to keep either shooting projectiles or spew poison at you. Pay attention to Noster? Well, Fardas is just going to keep running around causing shockwaves to prevent you from knocking Noster down. Ignore Animus while trying to knock down either Noster or Fardas. It's time to dodge nuclear rays that can target everyone. Now in multiplayer, this can be alleviated by having one player distract one of the bugs while the other two knock down the other one, which in my own experience made the fight a lot easier since I didn't have to worry about one of them constantly pestering me while I dealt with the other. Though keep in mind that if you don't have a ranged weapon to deal with Noster, it's only going to fly around scot-free without it being challenged. Also in multiplayer, if either yourself or one of your teammates gets knocked down while distracting one of the bugs, they'll essentially gang up on the rest of you immediately, changing the pace of the fight to their advantage. But what I noticed about this fight is that you're pretty much able to loop Fardas by always sticking close to him and dodging to the side to avoid his slam. There really isn't too much to worry about the shockwave that comes afterwards, as it completely misses if you're already close to him. And with Noster, sometimes all one player has to do is distract him long enough for the others to always knock down Fardas to keep damaging Animus. But as I have mentioned before, it can all go downhill if you don't have the fight go at your pace.
お前はもう死んでいる。何？
It's time for the number 3 spot, with the very first Everdark that introduced us to the enhanced bosses, Elden, aka Everdark Gaping Jaw. Now, although the fight doesn't change too much, it's one where you really need to know when to dodge, retreat, and make the fight go at your pace, especially since Elden is extremely aggressive in both solo queue and in multiplayer, not only having to deal with it running around the arena, but it also doing slam attacks that do a shockwave right afterwards, so good dodge timing is something that's going to be needed. In terms of having to retreat, since it activates its storm at the beginning of phase 3 and even afterwards, you do need to know what animation it does to start getting away from it to avoid getting knocked down immediately. Now, in having to make the fight go at your pace, it's a pretty difficult task. Starting off with solo queue, this boss just doesn't stay still. Although you can punish it after it finishes one of its attacks, there are times that I wasn't able to even hit it due to its hitbox being farther away than it looks. Plus, there are other times that Elden will straight up do a follow-up attack to disrupt your punish against it. And yes, you have to dodge those to avoid getting disrupted and giving Elden the change of pace in the fight. There isn't too much of a difference in multiplayer. The only thing is that everyone has to be paying attention to its moveset, as Elden will definitely do whatever it can to target one of you and force the rest of you into having to revive either yourself or your teammates for an easier time. Keep in mind that Elden behaves like an animal that's hunting, so if two of you are already down, although possible, it's going to be extremely difficult to revive even one player, as Elden will keep pouncing on the last player to end the fight. Going into the final 2 spots, these two can be exchanged with one another, since this is the point in which if you were only face tanking everything that's coming your way and dependent on pure luck to win, you'll both run out of winding graces extremely quick in solo queue, and in multiplayer, you'll become a liability to the rest of your team, as these fights do combine everything from the other Everdarks, which are properly dodging the counterattack, knowing when to retreat, making the fight go at your pace, and finally, target priority under pressure while also having the added bonus of ending your fight extremely quick, and that's regardless of what level you're currently at. Coming in at number 2, it's Libra, aka Everdark Equilibrious Beast. Crazy, huh? How is Libra not the hardest Everdark boss of the game if a lot of players struggle against him? Don't get me wrong, this fight is really difficult, but for a different reason. Libra is hard to defeat because players end up panicking against the mimics that he spawns, since Libra as a whole doesn't change his moveset from his second phase. He only adds the mimics to the fight to make you prioritize them instead of him. Now, when you compare the fight from solo queue to multiplayer, the most obvious difference is the amount of mimics that Libra will summon, which, although understandable, you should be able to at least take down your own mimic without much issue, since you're able to bait out their attacks to punish them pretty frequently. Now, if you're struggling against your own mimic in solo queue, that same issue will carry on over to multiplayer, regardless if you use Wendy Graces to revive or not. Also, add the fact that you do need to keep track of what Libra is doing in the background, and even in solo queue, this fight can be absolutely chaotic with the mimics chasing you around as well. Now, how does Libra's fight use all of the aspects from the previous Everdarks? For properly dodging the counterattack, it's pretty straightforward. Time your dodge correctly when either Libra swings at you, teleports to your position, summons his projectiles, which, by the way, always spin in the same direction, or uses his land explosion on you. Same as with the mimics, as long as you properly dodge to make your own opening, you should be able to take them down relatively quick to give yourself a nice golden nugget for a quick buff and healing. Which I'll mention right now, those little healing nuggets are great for keeping you in the fight for longer periods of time and avoid having to use your flash too frequently. For knowing when to retreat, not too much to say about this one. Just don't go bull rushing into Libra when it isn't needed, with the most obvious move being when he decides to separate everyone with a Madness Blast. Failing to do so will normally result in you either using a flash to heal or getting knocked down, and that's regardless of what level you're currently at when doing the fight. In making the fight go at your pace, it will mostly narrow down to how both yourself, if doing the fight in solo queue, and how your team, if doing the fight in multiplayer, decide to go about it for the mimics he spawns. Since believe it or not, Libra is always forcing you to fight at his pace, not yours. If you let the mimics run around for too long, Libra will just keep summoning more, which will keep the fight going at the pace that he wants. On the flip side, if both yourself when playing in solo queue and your team, if playing in multiplayer, are able to eliminate the mimics extremely fast or keep them distracted long enough, Libra will essentially just fight as if he was in the second phase, and the fight will shift to your pace once again. And finally, the target priority under pressure. This is the factor that I noticed lacking from a lot of players when attempting to fight. Many just ran around the place, not prioritizing the mimics while keeping track of what Libra is going to do next. Alternatively, you could prioritize and only aiming at Libra, but this can result in you getting ganked up by all of the mimics at once, hence why this factor ends up being the one that either makes or breaks this entire fight. Now, in multiplayer, this factor really shows if you're actually capable of keeping your composure and keep track of what's happening in the background, as not paying attention to either what Libra or the mimics are doing will normally result in you getting overwhelmed by everyone. Now, if both your teammates are knocked down, which will happen if none of you are skilled enough, and decide to prioritize reviving them, you'll only get the chance to do it if Libra and the mimics aren't paying attention to you at all. But even then, although possible to revive them, it's going to be an extremely difficult task, as Libra and his mimics will force you to prioritize them instead of your teammates.
Jackpot.
Moving on to the hardest Everdark boss of Nightreign, I have to give this title to Gladius, aka Everdark Tricephalos. Yup, the boss that I personally considered the second easiest boss of the base game when I did the Platinum Trophy ends up being my personal hardest Everdark boss, and in my opinion, rightfully so, as this fight is extremely difficult in both solo queue and in multiplayer. While Libra can be considered the hardest Everdark boss for a lot of players due to his mimics being constantly summoned, especially when attempting to fight in multiplayer, I think with Libra's moveset not having anything new added to it, it brings him down just a notch. Now Gladius on the other hand, not only does he have a couple of new moves, but all of his attacks from his regular moveset now have an aftershock effect added to them, while also having the capability of one-shotting anyone that isn't playing the fight at their absolute best. Now, how does Gladius fall into each category that's already been mentioned with Libra? Well, here are the details. In dodging properly to counterattack, I'll just be as blunt as possible. If you're only depending on pure luck and are always panic rolling as opposed to actually timing your dodge to counterattack, then guess what? Your fight is going to end extremely fast in solo queue and you'll become a liability to your entire team in multiplayer. That's even if you have either Wending Graces or the Noclatio buff on standby, as Gladius will absolutely punish you with either a strong attack or the aftershock effect of one of those attacks. And yes, this applies to both solo queue and multiplayer, with his two ultimate attacks being the ones that can destroy entire teams in the blink of an eye. For knowing when to retreat, since Gladius' moves now have an aftershock effect added to them, you really have to pay attention for when you have to retreat to avoid getting caught by either the initial attack or the aftershock effect, as well as knowing when to stop attacking, since if either yourself or their teammates aren't paying attention to his moveset, well, guess what? You might have accidentally given him a damage buff that will guarantee you getting knocked down with one hit if you don't dodge the follow-up attack that's always used. And yes, these swings, including the one he does 3 times in a row, can eliminate more than one player at once. Believe me, I've seen it happen too many times. In making the fight go at your pace, Gladius is overall an extremely aggressive boss, so being able to make the fight go at your pace is a difficult task, but doable. But you do have to make sure that you aren't losing your cool or panic, as any of those factors will immediately make Gladius change the pace of the fight to his once again. This happens much more often once he splits into the 3 separate dogs, as he will do anything to surround you and make you panic so that you aren't paying attention to the dog that's carrying the blade. And now that I've mentioned the 3 separate dogs, this is where target priority really needs to be remembered. I've seen many players lose their composure and get overwhelmed by getting surrounded by all of the separate dogs, which includes getting cornered by all of them while ignoring the dog that's holding the blade, which is probably the worst thing you can do, as that one specific dog is the most dangerous of the bunch and will make sure you're distracted so that it can finish you off when you aren't looking. It's best to prioritize looking at him while using your own peripheral vision to keep track of what the other dogs are doing. In multiplayer, this is where it can get extremely difficult to revive one of your teammates, as while focusing on one or both of your teammates, Gladius will make it his top priority to close the distance extremely quick and interrupt your attempts at reviving them. Although you're still able to revive your team with your regular attacks, there are very few chances of doing that due to how aggressive Gladius is, which will normally prioritize your attention onto him instead of your teammates, so your ultimate is normally going to be used for that if everyone in the team keeps getting knocked down.
Jackpot.
Now tell me, have you managed to defeat all of the Everdarks in both solo queue and multiplayer? If so, I'd like to hear your personal take on the Everdark versions of these bosses, and what experiences have you had against them with your chosen Nightfarer. See you around in the next ranking or platinum video that I decide to go for next.